Muy buenos días a todos en nuestro segundo día con el doctor Francis Pitard. El día de hoy platicaremos de cuantificar el sesgo en el muestreo es un ejercicio inútil. Les doy la bienvenida a este segundo día y es un agrado para nosotros y orgullo poder nuevamente compartir este día con ustedes este tema tan importante para sus operaciones. Doy de una u otra manera la bienvenida a la licenciada Ángela Hernández para que nos apoye con el tema del día de hoy en español.
Muy buenos días a todos. Les voy a leer brevemente la reseña de lo que será el día de hoy en este curso, en esta plática, perdón. El tema de hoy será: cuantificar el sesgo en el muestreo es un ejercicio inútil. ¿Por qué el sesgo de muestreo constantemente es un mito? Muchas personas piensan que si pueden cuantificar el sesgo de muestreo, entonces pueden decidir si pueden aceptar el sesgo o no. Desafortunadamente, en el muestreo no existe un sesgo de muestreo constante, especialmente si hay varios sesgos de muestreo superpuestos en el sistema de muestreo. Adherirse a una exactitud del muestreo totalmente rigurosa ahorrará tiempo, dinero y muchas reuniones innecesarias durante la vida útil de un proyecto. Básicamente, muestrear no es jugar a los dados. Importante, los invitamos a todos ustedes a enviar sus dudas a la sección de preguntas y respuestas la cual se ubica en la barra inferior del programa de Zoom, simbolizada por 2 recuadros de diálogo. En específico, si ustedes tienen alguna pregunta, les invitamos a que vaya justo en esta área. Asimismo, les informamos que hoy contaremos con un intérprete en español, a petición de todos ustedes el día de ayer. Pueden seleccionar el idioma en el que desean escuchar el curso en la barra inferior del programa de Zoom, haciendo clic en el botón titulado Interpretación, simbolizado con un mundo en el extremo derecho de la barra. Por mi parte es todo. Sean todos bienvenidos y gracias por su asistencia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your participation today. Today's topic will be quantifying a sampling bias is an exercise in futility. And the question that we will address today is why handling sampling bias is a myth. Many people think that if they quantify the sampling bias, they then can decide if they can live with the bias or not. Unfortunately, in sampling, there is no such thing as a constant sampling bias, especially if there are several superimposed sampling bias in the sampling system. Adherence to sampling correctness with no possible negotiation will save time, money, and many unnecessary and unfortunate meetings for the many years to come during the lifetime of a project. Basically, sampling is not gambling. We would like to invite you to use the questions and answers section of this webinar to send us your doubts. The second half of this session will be specially dedicated to answer questions, so we really encourage you to participate with any question that you should have. Additionally, it is important to mention, and as you requested yesterday, that we will have an interpreter for simultaneous translation to Spanish. In order to have access to this service, please use the button titled Interpretation that is on the right-hand side of the control bar at the bottom of this program, and then you can select the Spanish as your preferred language. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Francis Pitard, and we will start the lecture right now.
Okay, so that's the one here.
Not sure. You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. Stop share now. Hit one, do stop share.
New share,
No,
post share. I don't know what
I don't know, dear. I really don't know.
I don't know what I'm doing.
You are screen sharing. No, because you were already sharing,
Share?
I guess.
Now what? I can start my talk. I want to see your picture here.
Hello, Dr. Pitard. Can you
Yes.
hear me well?
I hear you, but I don't see you.
Remember that yesterday when you share your screen, you see the full screen of what you're sharing. So don't
Yeah.
worry, you're live. People can see you and hear you. You can put your full screen exactly with the presentation. That's correct.
Like it is now.
Exactly.
So I can proceed with the lecture.
That's correct. You can start. Everything is okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to that lecture today, which is a follow-up on what we did yesterday. We are going to talk about quantifying sampling bias. Is it a wise thing to do? Is it wishful thinking? Many people are, especially in upper management, are making the argument that, okay, at the plant we may not have the perfect sampling system. However, if we perform a bias test, we may be able to decide if we can live with that sampling system that is not correct, or on the contrary, if we should think about another option, such as equiprobabilistic sampling systems that very few manufacturers around the world can provide, such as Tecpromin in Chile, but there are a few more. And so we're going to comment on this because it's a very important subject, as many people don't realize how much a sampling system that is not correct can hurt them in a very subtle way that is very difficult to quantify, very difficult to see. Nevertheless, usually the economic consequences can be devastating. I'll just give you an example. Many years ago, it was a big, I can tell you which company it is. It was Codelco in Chile. And it was one of their operations south of Santiago that was sampling the final tail. It's a huge plant, big flow, 10,000 cubic meter an hour going to the waste dump. And it was not properly sampled by taking the samples that were taken were mainly taken from the upper half of the stream. And we argue about this sampling system for quite a few years until they decided to invest in a good sampling system that cost maybe almost $1 million. And the first month that system was in operation made the general manager very upset because he said, what happened? What is wrong with your sampling system? The copper content of the final tail, molybdenum content of the final tail went up by 25%. This is impossible. And I answer to him and say, you know, this is not the way to look at it. What you should ask yourself is the fact that you are selling those tailings to a junior company and you were never curious about the fact that the junior company was extremely successful. So that was the problem. For many years, they gave a big gift to the junior company, not knowing that the copper content and the molybdenum content of the final tail was much higher than what they thought. And back calculating for 20 years of doing this, they found out that they lost $2 billion. So it's a very important subject. Usually the dollar losses are enormous and they are well hidden, very difficult to see, and that's a problem, okay? So bias tests, this is a cartoon just to make a joke of it, but It says it all. Bias tests for sampling system are an exercise in futility. Why is that? The reason is very simple. When you have a sampling system that is not correct, such as a pressure sampler, such as a stationary cutter in the stream, or several stationary cutter in the stream, such as a cross-stream sampler that is not properly designed, you know, you don't have one bias introduced by one problem. You are likely to have many, okay? So, and that is what people don't understand. This is a very complex subject, and if you are not well prepared, well trained about the theory of sampling, you are not going to see anything about the problem you are dealing with, okay? So there are many sampling errors. We looked at them yesterday: in situ nugget effect, fundamental sampling error, grouping and segregation error, you know, increment delimitation error, increment extraction error, increment preparation error, increment weighting error, the short-term fluctuation error, the long-term fluctuation error, problem with cycles, and then problem with the laboratory analytical error. So now I'm going to pinpoint with the arrow here the ones that we are concerned right now. It's correctness, increment delimitation error, okay? If you cannot cross the stream properly to take an increment, this error is devastating. Problem of recovery. On impact with the cutter edge, something may happen and the sampling system may be selective on what is taking. It may take too many coarse fragments, not enough, or too many fines. So that is called the increment extraction error. This is one of the biggest generator of sampling bias in sampling. Preparation error, so that is not always the sampling system that is at fault. Maybe is what we do to it after. What we take a sample, we send it to the laboratory, we dry it, we split it, we crush it, we pulverize it, we split it again, and the list goes on. So a bias can be introduced right here. And then, so those are the bias generator. And very often when a sampling system is not correct, actually, there is not one bias involved. There is about 4, sometimes 5 or 6 that are completely independent source of bias, and they add up in a very strange way over time, and that makes it nearly impossible to even if you do a bias test, let's say you don't find a bias. Well, a sampling system that is not correct is always biased. So if you don't find the bias, it's because the bias test was not conducted properly, okay? Was incomplete. Or the reference sample was biased itself. So that's another subject. If you're going to do a bias test, you have to compare to a flawless sample. And that is very difficult because if you are capable to take a flawless sample to compare a sampling system, then why don't you do the sampling in a flawless way every day instead of using the bad sampler? That's the way to look at it. And then the last thing you want to do is to compare a bad sampler with another bad sampler. In that case, we are going nowhere. We will not prove anything. Okay. And then also,
Dr. Pitard, sorry to interrupt you. We are having a technical issue in the sense that the slides are a little bit blurry. So in order to correct it, can you help me please to stop sharing your screen so we can again set it up?
come here. Stop sharing.
Okay.
Correct. Now,
Okay.
can you click again on sharing your screen? And you're going to see a menu. Wait for me on that menu. Can you see the menu where you can select the screens, screen 1 or PowerPoint or different? Exactly.
How does
we
it
need-
look now?
It looks blurry. It's because on that menu, when you choose which screen you want to share, at the bottom, there's a place that says optimize screen share for video clip. We need to make sure it's not selected.
I'm not sure. I don't see anything on my.
Okay, don't worry. Let's go again. Stop sharing the screen right now. Perfect. Now click on the sharing screen at the top to the right. There's like a tick. You can click on that.
This?
Speaker view?
Enter
Yes.
full screen?
Full screen, that's correct.
Yes.
And then you see a menu where you can choose which screen you want to choose, correct? You can share PowerPoint, you can share your full screen.
No.
We have share screen.
Speaker view?
Go back to the lecture.
Before we need to correct that issue because again, we are having that blurry image. So on share screen, there's going to be a menu before you start sharing your screen. It's
Share. I click on share screen. Yes.
And then a little window popped up.
Optimize screen.
Exactly. That one should not be selected.
Should not. Okay. It is not.
It is not now.
Perfect. Now you can go back and choose as before. Perfect.
Like that?
Excellent. That's perfect. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Dr. Pitard.
Okay. So it looks better?
Yes, everything can see perfect.
Okay. So basically what I was trying to explain here is that when a sampling system is not correct, you just have too many problems that are adding up. And so the only logical thing to do is prevention. It's the best strategy that you can dream of. So it takes education, of course, get comfortable with the rule of sampling correctness. You go to my book or, you go to some literature, you go to the proceeding of the World Conference on Sampling and Blending that have many good papers from the best expert in sampling around the world. And then, of course, if you have to do this, otherwise you won't understand the danger of bad sampling system. So sampling correctness, as far management in a company, if they want to save time, money, frustration, bad meeting with finger pointing going nowhere, they should have zero tolerance for sampling systems that are not correct, which, as I explained yesterday, that eliminate about 75 to 80% of the sampling system on the market today, okay? So coming back to that statement, 75 to 80% of the sampling systems that are not correct on the market today. So some people, one question someone yesterday say, how come so many people are using those samplers? They may be not that bad, because otherwise it will not be that many people that use them. No, the problem is this. Since the theory of sampling is not well taught at universities, you have on the market the manufacturers that build good machines, but unfortunately they are flawed by design. So there's nothing you can do about it. It cannot be fixed. Okay. So, and on top of that, they want to sell them. So they have usually outstanding marketing systems that are very effective to convince upper management to buy their equipment. And that does not help, you know, because when you believe the salesman, when you believe the engineering firm, without to do your homework first, it makes you very vulnerable to those people that are in the business of making quick money. Okay, that's basically the problem. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So you have to also have a good statistical understanding of sampling biases variability. So obviously it comes with a very good knowledge of the theory of sampling. There is no other way. Be aware of that. Now, problem number one. Sampling bias are all created by some form of segregation. Okay. This is because the stream is always segregated to some extent. So, and that is the problem with the sampling equipment, not capable to take segregation into account. Unfortunately, segregation is an always changing phenomenon. The stream is never segregated the same way. It navigates all over the place depending on flow rate, on many factors, you know, curves in the systems or, you know. So as a result, that is a very strong statement. Sampling biases are never constant. And that's a problem. So problem number two, sampling bias are believed to be constant, lack analytical bias. Here on that sketch, I show you a typical example of a reproducible bias. On the vertical axis, you have subsampling assaying from laboratory A. And then on the horizontal axis, you have subsampling assaying from laboratory B. And you see every sample here is shown by a star. And you can have a line that fits this the best. And you realize in that case that you have a relatively constant bias on one side of the, this is the line, the transect at 45 degrees, and that is actually one of the regression line, if you prefer, that show you absolute bias. It does not matter if the grade is low or the grade is high, the bias is about the same. And this is, we call that an absolute bias. It's relatively constant. In sampling, you never have a bias like that, never. This is typical of an analytical bias, okay? I'll show you another example of that. You have another type of analytical bias here. This is not an absolute bias, it's a relative bias. In other words, the lower the grade, the smaller the bias in absolute value, and the higher the grade, the higher the bias. So it's a relative bias, relatively constant around that line I show you here, relative to the bisector. So you obviously have a bias here. This is typical of an analytical bias. It's another kind, and it's a relative bias. Be aware that sampling bias don't behave that way, never. So you may say, what a sampling bias looks like then? Give me an example. This is an example of a sampling bias. You see, when the average of the bias may be shown by that dark line here, but the bias navigates all over the place. When you have a sampling bias, you always have a big precision problem as well, because the sampling bias is not reproducible, sometimes is negligible, sometimes there is no bias, sometimes is heavily biased one way, next day is heavily biased the other way, so it navigates all over the place. In other words, even if the average of the bias is not bad relative to the bisector, be aware that the ellipse, the precision ellipse around the bias can be quite large. And that is what people don't understand, that even if on average the sampling bias is small or even negligible, it's going to hurt you, period. So the question is now, is it possible to use a correcting factor for a biased sampling system? Just because of what I just explained to you shortly for the last few slides, the answer is absolutely not. You should never do that. It can be done for an analytical bias, but never for a sampling bias. You will make things worse every time. So, save time, money, and frustration. Get educated. To get to that book, you can go to my website, or you can go to the internet to Francis Pitard Books, to Amazon. You will find it. And I strongly recommend that book because it was written with a special objective in mind, that people can self-train themselves on the theory of sampling. This is the third edition of my book. It has been very successful over the years. The first edition was 1988, second edition 1993, the third edition last year. So this is the best thing you can do, believe me on this. You will not regret to read and get properly educated about the theory of sampling. Another way to do it is to participate to the World Conference on Sampling and Blending that take place every 2 years. You know, the next one will be in Norway in, let me look at it will be June 1 to 3, 2021, okay? We have another conference like that, more or less, and in Lima, it will be June 1, 3, no, it will be July 8 and 9, 2021 in Lima. So those conferences will help you, you know, because not only you listen at people that are competent, you know, presenting very valuable lecture on those difficulties for you, but also you meet people, you meet manufacturers, you talk to them, you see their good product, you see their weak points as well. So it's those conferences are very valuable for people that are interested in looking at sampling system and figure out if they can live with them or not. Be preventive. That's my conclusion about this. So now we can we can proceed with some questions, and maybe depending on the questions, I may show you another lecture, since we have plenty of time, about what do you do if your boss say, I don't care, you do a bias test. Well, you know, you have to comply with the boss. That's the way it is. That's normal life. So if you are cornered to a situation where people say, we are going to do a bias test anyway, then I will have another lecture to give you some recommendations, okay, to make sure that you do the right thing. But let's have some questions first from the audience here to see where we are going with this and what is the problem of many people around the world, okay? So
we are waiting for some questions to come in. Dr. Francis, wait
okay.
for us 1 minute.
Hello, we have just so far one from Felix Toconas. The question is, if the sampling bias is not possible to evaluate, how to prove to the management the metal balance is acceptable?
Well, like I say, if management is not properly educated on the theory of sampling, this is the first thing to do, is to educate management. Otherwise, you can prove nothing to them. It's like talking to the walls. So if the people are not well educated on the subject, you cannot have a conversation. And therefore, you will never convince them. And therefore, the only thing they are going to believe is for you to do a bias test to prove if the sampling system is acceptable or not. We are on the wrong trajectory here. We are going nowhere. And yes, sometimes it has to be done that way because top management does not understand the problem. Okay, so I know you, and working at Glencore, we have been working together before, and we know the problem very well. It's not new.
Okay, let me ask one question from yesterday from Rafael Sanchez. For one ore crush at P80 90 millimeters, what will be the sampling opening of the gross sampling equipment?
90 millimeters, 9 centimeters.
No, 28, sorry, 28. Okay, I would do. I would ask.
Ask the top size of the fragment. What is the top size of the fragment?
he's only including the P80 and for 28 millimeters. That is.
So it's passing 80% passing at about 1 inch, 28 millimeters. Yeah? So it depends on the flow rate. If it's a relatively small flow rate, like 500 tons an hour, you can have a cutter opening that is about 9 centimeter opening. It will be the job. But if it's, say, 5,000 ton an hour, it will have to be about 15 to 18 centimeter opening. It depends on the flow rate. The more the flow rate, the bigger the opening should be, because the more the material bounce and creating problems.
Okay, next question from Manuel Rodriguez from Fresnillo PhD. As we all know, the ideal for the analysis of a lab sample is having the biggest amount for it analyzed. For the traditional methods of fire, it is used 50 grams of sample for gold. For gold and silver, what can you tell about new technologies for the sample analysis in which is highlights the analyze up to 500 grams of sample with a photon aside? Are they trustable? Are we in the end of the traditional fire sampling?
Okay, this is a very good point. You know, the traditional fire assay, it's crush the material fine, minus 100 micron more or less, and then do a 30 gram fire assay or a 50 gram fire assay. And we know the vulnerability of that because it sometimes the gold does not comminute. Gold flakes remain relatively coarse. You may have materials that is 95% minus 100 micron, but nevertheless, you still have a few isolated gold flakes that are 200 micron, 300 micron, sometimes up to 1 millimeter, and that creates total havoc in a result with regular fire assay. So it's not working. So we have been promoting a long time that in some cases, it depends on the mines, it depends on the material, where it comes from, the type of deposit, the type of gold you have. You may have to go to 500 gram screen fire assay. You may have to go to multi-kilograms cyanide bottle roll. You can go with, how you call that, little Nelson concentrator to go around that problem. But today now, there is a new technique with photons. The company that come with this idea is an Australian company. It's called Chrysos. I know them well. And they have been asking me to help them to validate the technique. At first glance, I think this technique, which is new, is very promising. But nevertheless, we have to do some tests to validate it. And we are in a process of doing so with some gold mine in Australia to compare regular fire assay with also gravity concentration, where we will have a concentrate and assay, fire assay to extinction. I mean, you may have to do 10, 15 fire assay to do the concentrate to extinction to make sure there is no bias here. And then a regular fire assay from the tail, do the weighted average. So we are going to do that on many, many samples and to validate the technique. Okay, so that is coming. It will come in the next few months. It's in process right now in some gold mine in Australia. Okay, and I will do the interpretation of the result of this, and we'll write a validation report for the technique. But to answer your question, can we trust that new technique? At that stage, I say yes. You will have to wait about those results to make sure. But the fact that the ultraviolet energy of those beams is very strong, there is no way that if you present a sample that is 500 grams or even 1 kilo to that probe, there is no way that any gold particle will escape. So I'm fairly confident that it's going to work well.
Okay, next question from Gerardo Miranda. Does the human error is considered as bias or only is considered the efficiency of the equipment?
No, the human error can introduce a huge bias. Huh? So the human error is, that raises an issue here, that on the subject of sampling, you have to use very well-trained people. It is wrong to hire somebody in the street here and say, okay, you have 3 days of training and you are on your own at sample preparation. This is looking for a catastrophe. It takes 6 months to train someone properly, to do sample preparation properly, you know, so the training is a key here. You cannot take a shortcut on this. And then that raises another issue. If it takes 6 months to train someone, don't let them go after that. You have to give them an incentive to stay with you. So you know what I mean.
Okay, next question from Roger Aragon. Big thing, points of sampling, how do we choose them?
Repeat the question, please.
Big thing, points of sampling, how do we choose them?
Big things.
Big thing, like big point, points of sampling, how do we choose them?
Well, every case is different here. You know, if you want to install a good sampling system that is very good, usually the best way is to go at the discharge of a stream. The discharge of a conveyor belt, under that discharge you will have a cross-stream sampler. A flotation plant, a lot of material in a big flow rate, maybe 5,000 cubic meter an hour, 10,000 cubic meter an hour, things like that. You go to the discharge of that stream, and right under the discharge, we are going to install a cross-stream sampling system. Usually, the best place to do that properly is at the discharge of streams. It's the only place where we can do that properly. There is no way you can do it in the stream. There is no way you can do it from above the belt, you know. That's my recommendation.
Okay, next question from Felix Toconas. The adjustment of the metal balance is possible considering the difference of the metal values as a variance. Is that assumption correct?
Hi, Felix, by the way. Okay. In order to do material balance, not only you have to make sure that the sampling system are not biased. That's number one. And then after that, there is another issue. It's that you have to achieve very high precision in the sampling system. In other words, you have to be using outstanding sampling protocol. So at the end of the day, when you add the variance of the feed to the variance of the tail to the variance of the concentrate, and then they add up, you know, if you don't have excellent precision at each point, you end up with an excessive variance that is forcing you to wait. You do a material balance one day, but it's not conclusive because the precision is not good enough. So you wait 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, and maybe at the end of the week, you can have an average that has reasonable variance to find out if the reconciliation is okay or not. So you are very vulnerable on 2 issues here. The bias, of course, that's number one. And then the precision should be very robust, and that you have to use outstanding protocol. You know, you have to have a good sampling system, good subsampling system, good sample preparation, good analytical error, so that the variability should be very, very small. I give you an example. You know, if you look at the variability at the mine, we say, well, copper mine, is it plus or minus 10%, 15% okay for copper or molybdenum? I say, yes, as long as you don't have a bias, there's no problem. You say, is the same precision at the plant okay for material balance? I will say absolutely not. To do reliable material balance at the plant, you will have to achieve much better, like plus or minus 2 or 3%, you know, for copper on the feed, on the tails, and maybe 1% on the concentrate. So that is far more difficult, okay?
Okay, next question, David Torres. Can a variographic analysis detect bias? I did a non-probabilistic analysis that had excellent result with a very attractive yield.
Variographic analysis of data, you always learn something. Even if the sampling system is biased, you are going to learn something from the variographic analysis. So, but it's not the panacea, okay? The variographic analysis will be a whole lot more valid if it was samples taken by a correct sampling system. But nevertheless, with variographic analysis, you always learn something. What is going to pop out is unpredictable, and it's good to learn that information sometime, even if the samples are not perfect. The variogram will tell you if the sampling system has a problem. It won't quantify the bias. Don't get me wrong on this, but it will tell you if there is a problem.
Okay, next question, Angeles. Can we make more trustable the sampling process for gold and silver?
Can we make?
Yes. Can we make more trustable the sampling process for gold and silver?
Well, you know, it depends on the product, it depends on the deposit, it depends what kind of gold and silver you're talking about. The first thing to do here is to get that information from the geologist, I told you, so we know the property, the sampling property of the gold and the silver in the operation you are dealing with. That's very important. So when I go to an operation, either doing exploration or even doing production, my first question to those people is, where is the gold or the silver? But be careful. Don't give me one answer. You have to answer that question in 20 different ways. Where is the gold? Is it clustering? What is the size of the gold particles? What is their association with other minerals? Are they within other minerals or nearby other minerals? Can they concentrate on in a vein of sulfides, for example? Are they disseminated in quartz veins? There are many ways to answer that question, and unless we have a very well-documented answer to that question in many ways, we don't know what is the right thing to do. Okay, we don't know what kind of sampling equipment we are going to need, and we don't know what kind of protocol we have to implement, and put in practice with the proper sampling system. So it starts with, where is the gold? 20 different ways to answer that question.
Okay, next question, David Giles. Is it worth taking many cheap samples across a silver gold bearing bind for great control and reserve calculation in a mine, or better, a shortened amount of channel samples?
I'm not sure I understand the questions. It's
okay, again, is it worth taking many economy samples across a silver gold bearing bind for great control and reserve calculation in a mine, or better, a shorter amount of channel samples?
Well, the sampling, no matter what you do, the sampling must be correct. So if it's a very cheap grab sample, you're going nowhere. A properly designed channel sample underground, for example, will be far superior to grab samples. So many bad samples will not give you good information. You are better off with a few good quality samples. So either taken by drilling, taken by channel sampling, taken with the best you can do in open pit with blast holes, but stay away of many grab samples that are not correct and completely operator dependent, So, for example, underground, some people are in love with what we call muck sample. They go to the pile after blast, they take a 5 kilo or 3 kilo and send that to the lab. They take many of those samples. Those samples are useless, completely useless.
Okay, next question, Danilo Javier, about the relationship between feed topside particular in basin sampler and its opening. What is your recommendation?
Okay, if the flow is relatively small, which is the case most of the time with Vesen sampler are usually used for less than 500 tons an hour or less than 500 cubic meter an hour. They are relatively small units. So the cutter opening should be about, for solids, it should be on the, remember the cutters are radial, okay? So the smaller opening, that cross the stream when it go in rotation. The smaller opening is the inner part of the stream that they cross here. That part, that opening should be about 3 times the size of the coarse fragment if the fragments are more than 1 centimeter. If they are, if it's very fine material, you cannot go smaller than 1 centimeter opening at that point. It's not a good thing to do. You will have a bias. Okay. So it depends on the size distribution. For a flotation plant where the material is relatively fine, you should have the small cutter opening here near the center, about 1 centimeter. And then in the middle of the stream, it will be here, it will be maybe 2 or 3 centimeters here. Okay.
Okay, next question. Anonymous question. If it's possible to compare a sample got in an incorrect weight with one that could be taken correctly of the sample flow, is possible that an incorrect sampling system be performing well?
Someday, yes, by sheer luck. It depends, again, you know, like I say, sampling bias is not going to be constant, okay? So one day is going to be biased one way, another day is going to be reasonably well, no bias. The day after is going to be biased the other way. So that thing is going to navigate all over the place, which is no good, you know. Let me think here. Remember, everything I say during those 2 days, if the sampling system is not correct, you are playing with fire, okay? Even if you do a test that shows that there is no significant bias, you are playing with fire. Number one, let me put a very strong point here about people that do bias test. With a bias test, you can prove only one thing. Remember that. You can only prove that the sampling system is biased. You cannot prove, and will never prove, that a sampling system is not biased.
Okay, next question, Everardo Suarez. If we do a bias test in a copper concentrate for 2 methods, it will be okay, a bias of 0.5% copper is near to 2% relativeness. How can we decide how much we can accept?
This is a decision for upper management to take. This is a very important question here. Can I show you some slides? We go to a lecture and show you some slides on this, since we have plenty of time?
Yes, of course, Dr. Pitard. Go ahead,
Okay.
just as we did before.
I'm going to do that, but I have to, how do I do that? I have to minimize the screen here, exit full screen, go to my, no, I have to go to FPSC. Minimize.
Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, God, how do we do this?
Is it Excel, Word, or PowerPoint, or what? I don't know.
Practically. I don't know how to do this without to mess up everything.
Without to lose your.
No
Without to
worries,
lose.
Dr. Pitard, just as you did before, exactly as you did before, should be fine.
I need to go in my files, but
Don't close that.
I need to minimize this and see the, I can. And slideshow.
No. I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know how to get back there.
I don't know how to do that without to exit
Zoom.
the Zoom.
I don't think so. Mm-mm.
How are we doing, Dr. Pitard?
Okay, now you're getting somewhere.
I'm getting somewhere, but it's slow. I'm sorry about this.
That's perfect. We are happy to wait.
I don't remember.
I don't know. You want to go to FPSC sampling course?
That is a lecture I want to show. Hannah, how do I?
Is that in PowerPoint?
No.
No.
So that's a lecture I want to show. Now what? I have to go back to my webinar.
Share, maybe?
Where?
No, that didn't work. No.
If I put this on the full screen, do you see what I put on the screen here?
Not yet, Dr. Pitard. Can you help me out going back to the Zoom menu? And you can click on share screen, which is the green button again.
Where is this?
Well, there's a Zoom thing.
Zoom?
Mhm.
Okay, you need to get your Zoom menu.
I don't have it.
You won't find it up there.
Share?
Try it. You don't have a Zoom option here.
I don't know how to go back to them. Here?
No,
This?
no,
It ought to be this.
it should be. Click on Zoom. Click on Isabel.
You found some again, Dr. Pitard?
I don't know how to get back to you.
Okay. Can you please check on the menu bar of the Windows? Below you should have both PowerPoint and you should have Zoom. So
Click on Zoom.
yes, on the Windows bar, click on Zoom. And
Again?
then move your mouse around so that it can display the menu, the black menu.
Bigger.
I don't understand.
Isabel, we have your picture and we have the lecture that he wants to display, but we don't have a Zoom menu.
Oh, okay, perfect. Now I get what's going on. Can you please go to my face and can you move your mouse around my face?
Yes.
And then at the bottom, you will see 4 buttons. And at the last one, you're gonna see a arrow that goes diagonally.
Okay.
Perfect. Now you should be able to see the menu at the bottom. Are you able to do it now?
Yes. Let's see.
Perfect.
No, you don't. You need to go up with this screen.
And then share.
And then the share screen, exactly.
And click on your lecture.
Okay.
There we go. Excellent.
So now we can stop.
Yes.
Okay.
We see you and we see the
So,
slides, so we are ready. Thank you,
yes.
Dr. Pitard.
Thank you very much. This is a guideline that I wrote and present in a World Conference on Sampling and Blending. And I can email it to you later on, you know. I can email it to Isabel and she will pass it to the people that are listening at my lecture, okay? So, how much allotted variability is reasonable for the fundamental sampling error? That's error that is generated by the mass of the sample you take, either the primary sampler, secondary sampler, or the final analysis at the laboratory. So it depends on what is acceptable to you, you know, where you work. It highly depends on where you work. It's 40% okay, 32, 16, 10, 5, 1. Obviously, we need some guideline here to help people. So it depends on the data quality objective. You should have well-defined objective when you do sampling. There are various points of view on this. You have the geologist, you have the grade control engineer, you have the metallurgist in charge of material balance, you have the metallurgist minimizing impurity and high purity material, you have the people in charge of trade of commodities and also environmental assessment. So all of those people are going to have different guidelines because they work with different level of tolerance, okay? Without precision here, no bias. Bias is another issue. You make sure your sampling system are not biased. So all of those people have something in common. The fundamental sampling error is not their only problem. There are other problems. There are grouping and segregation, there are analytical error, there are precision generated by small bias, you know, that kind of thing. So there, all of those are adding up. We group them, we group all of those additive error as residual sampling and analytical errors. I emphasize again, you should have done your best to eliminate the bias generator the best way you can. So let's say there are n sampling stage, a primary sampling stage, a secondary sampling stage, and then the final analytical sampling stage as a balance room when you take a few grams for the analysis. So now, the question is, how much is acceptable, how much is acceptable uncertainty for each of us, you know? So some sampling errors are extremely difficult to quantify. That's why you have to make sure that you eliminate all the source of bias first, but it's never going to be perfect. You will always have some residual tiny little bias with their precision. You will have always some problem with segregation that you can minimize by taking many increments. The only thing you can do on those, as we say over and over for 2 days, is to be preventive. So we assume we have been preventive, okay? So now, let's use a logical approach. Step number 1, allow a total allotted uncertainty that we can live with it. For example, for exploration, for gold, if you do plus or minus 32%, you're doing well. Exploration for copper, plus or minus 20%. I'm talking about the maximum, after you add all the source of uncertainty. For material balance for gold, 10%. Material balance for copper, 5%. Sales of concentrate for gold, 3%. Sale of concentrate for copper, 1%. Okay? So those are the maximum acceptable for different kind of people, of course. So you are going to allow half of the total allotted uncertainty we just mentioned now to the residual error and analytical error. So for example, exploration for gold total 32%. Precision, this is a precision statement, okay? Precision does not have additive property. You have to do the calculation with the variance. So when you do 0.32 square and take divide that by 2, and then take the square root again, allotting half of that for the residual variance, you will get 22.6 for the residual error, okay? And for grade control for copper, say a total of 20%, you will, if you allow half of that to the residual errors, you will have 14%. And then you allow the other half to the total fundamental sampling error. Same thing, you will get 22.6 for the total of the different fundamental error. You have a fundamental error for each sampling stage, remember. Okay. Now the fundamental sampling error can be divided between the various sampling stages in an appropriate way. So for example, you are going to allow half of that to the primary sampling stage, which is the total variability that we were talking about, divided by 4, because remember, you took half to the residual, and then half of that for the total fundamental error. Now we take half of that half for the fundamental error, which is the total divided by 4, and that gives you 16% for the gold, okay, etc. Secondary sampling system, half again, so it's divided by 8. Tertiary sampling system at the laboratory, for example, half again, so it's divided by 16. So you will have respectively 16% for uncertainty for the primary sampling stage, 11% for the secondary sampling stage, 8% for the final sampling stage. Okay? For grade control, for precious metals, you know, so that gives you this. For base metals, you go a little more stringent. I'm talking about exploration grade control. You do the same calculation, so it will be respectively this for all the sampling error, you know, and this for the fundamental error. Now, for guideline for process control, it's a little tighter. Yeah? And then guideline for commercial sampling. Now for precious metal, it will be respectively 3% total residual uncertainty for the error you have been trying to minimize, 2%. Total fundamental error, 2%, you know. For base metal, you can go tighter, 1%, 0.7, 0.7. So that leaves what? For the primary sampling stage, an uncertainty of 1.5, the secondary sampling stage 1.1, the tertiary sampling stage 0.75, and so on. Okay, so you see what you follow that guideline, how I do it. You know, in the book is better explained, but I can send you that lecture, and that gives you a guideline for everybody, depending if you are at the mine, at the plant, in commercial, or dealing with copper or precious metal. You will have a guideline here that will tell you how to distribute the uncertainty at the different place where you do sampling, from the primary sampler to the final sampling stage at the laboratory, okay? So I can send you that lecture if you want, okay? Your turn to talk.
Thank you, Dr. Pitard. If you are okay with this, we can continue with the questions that the public has sent us, okay?
Go ahead.
So, Felipe, we would like for you to start with the question.
Yes, of course. Next question, Flor de Maria. Could you please give us some bibliographic suggestion for the evaluation of a mineral deposit under exploration to determine the samples number and mass to be collected? In this case, we can determine the mineralogical characteristic, but not the total mass of the natural deposits.
Okay, this is yeah, that's an interesting question, because a long time ago, I was in charge of an exploration program myself. It was a deposit for nickel, and I know the subject very well. We had about 6 drilling machines in the field. We had a diamond drill, we had a reverse circulation, we had percussion. So when you work with a new deposit, the very first thing to do is to know what you're dealing with. What kind of beast are you trying to control? Okay, so you are a geologist, you do your homework, you know you have a target somewhere that is promising. So at first, don't do too many drilling. Number one, you are in exploration, you don't know for sure where the deposit is, you don't know for sure if you have a deposit in the first place. So in that case, you do fast drilling with reverse circulation, okay? No sense to go to high quality at that stage. Fast drilling with reverse circulation. So at one point, you are going to have a target and say, oh, this is we have a potential target here. Now, what is the right thing to do? We do infill with reverse circulation? I said, no. Go back to diamond drill with HQ diameter if it's not too deep, and Q diameter if you have to go very deep. But do some diamond drill. You don't have to do many. You can do some kind of a cross on the potential target with diamond drill. And from those diamond drill, maybe you will have, I don't know, between a dozen or 20 diamond drill covering the promising target. And from that, you have to do your mineralogical study of what you are dealing with. It's very important that, again, you have to answer that question. If it's gold, where is the gold? Answer the question 20 different ways, we need to know. And that goes for other minerals, for copper as well, for molybdenum especially. And, you know, this approach is universal, okay? And then when you know the mineralogy of that stuff quite well, now you can go back to much more drilling and field drilling. Do you have to do it with diamond core? It would be nice, but it's expensive. You can shift back to reverse circulation, you know, and compare what you get with the diamond drill you got. So that will be my approach, okay? It's, you have to do different level, different technique of drilling at first, and then go full blast at one point to know your deposit better. At that stage, when you know enough from the mineralogy with the diamond drill, when you know enough from the general contour of what the deposit is, then you shift back to reverse circulation to do a lot of drilling. And then at that stage, how many drill? When do you stop? That is a geostatistical problem. You shift to geostatistics. Now you're ready to give some information to geostatistician, and they will help you with diagrams to tell you if you have to stop drilling, if they know enough or not, okay? That's my approach.
Okay, next question, Carlos Nasi. In your experience, what is approximately the cost of building a good sampling system for a high-grade gold or silver, copper mine flotation plant in the range of 10,000 or 15,000 per day?
Hi, Carlos, by the way. This is a good question for Tecpromin, by the way. Ask them. And I will say that for gold, a flotation plant, for the feed sampler, after, if it's gold, you should have, you have to be careful here. Number one, I don't like to sample for gold before the ball mill. usually you have to decide, and again, it depends on what kind of deposit you are dealing with. If it's a deposit that requires gravity concentration, make sure that you have a gravity concentration circuit that works very well at all times, because that is the best sample of all. Always get rid of the coarse gold right away, and the gravity concentration circuit is a perfect way to do this. And the gravity concentration circuit will tell you how much coarse gold you add. You cannot sample that. You have to trust the gravity concentration circuit. Now, if this is done well, we are ready to feed the cyclone overflow going to the plant, you know, after the coarse gold has been eliminated. And that sampling system should not be very expensive. A good cross-stream sampling system here will require maybe a primary cross-stream sampler, and then a secondary, maybe a tertiary Wesen sampler. So we are talking about, I don't know. This is a question for Tecpromin, but I will say we are talking about 150,000 maybe for that sampling station. And then you will have a similar sampling station for the final tare. Okay.
Okay, anonymous question. How can you revise that your sampling system is performing well?
By doing visual inspection every shift. This, after you install a sampling system that is correct, that is properly designed, properly installed, operating properly, you have to make a commitment to it. Number one, you have to clean it every working shift. That is not negotiable. And every working shift, the operator has to be doing an inspection. He has to, you give him a list, click, 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 I checked every point. And as soon as something looks funny, you know, he has to give you that sheet and say, we got a problem here and we better fix it. He cannot wait. We have to do it now, okay? Sometimes there are minor problems you can fix in-house. Sometimes there are major problems that it will be a better idea to have a maintenance contract with the manufacturer than let how you call that, a maintenance department to damage the sampling system because they are not trained to deal with that kind of equipment. Okay, it takes special training to maintain sampling systems. So the best strategy you can have here is, for example, every 2 or 3 months, have a contract with the manufacturer. They come do an inspection on their own. They replace a few parts for you, and that will save you time and money in the long run, okay? Because you know it will be well done. But you have to have that daily inspection and cleaning from the operators to pinpoint little problems when they show up, okay?
Okay, next question from Danilo Javier. What can you say about the cross belt sampler? Do you think we can have a good sampling in this kind of device?
The answer is no. I mentioned it yesterday in one lecture. Stay away from this the best you can, because there are about 8 major problems in that kind of sampler, and half of them you can minimize the problem, yes, but half of them there is nothing you can do about it, and the problem cannot be minimized. And because of that, I divorce them completely. is just a troublemaker as far as you're concerned in your operation.
Okay, next question, Rodolfo Espinel. What are the best and most common use QPIs to measure bias? And what are the most applicable biases measurements for a metal reconciliation between the mill and the mine?
Well, this is an extremely difficult question because it's very complex. Everybody has problems. The mine have their bias of their own. The plants have their bias of their own. Okay. So there is no such a thing as the mine is at fault and the plant is right or vice versa. That does not exist. I have absolutely no illusion on that. Everybody has to do his homework. Everybody has to identify their structural problem I was mentioning yesterday. That's very important. And then when you analyze the structural problem in a meeting with all of those guys involved, the miners, the geologists, the labs, the metallurgists, you come with a consensus and say, okay, now, how are we going to compare the plant with the mine? You cannot do a comparison between the mine and the plant until the plant has a flawless sampling system. So, for example, if at the plant you have a cross-belt sampler, if you have stationary cutter, if you have pressure samplers, that we know they are not correct, we know they have many biases. So why to do a comparison with the mine? We are going nowhere here. We don't know what we are doing. So in order to do a comparison with the mine, we have to have a flawless system somewhere. So because of that, my advice is this: the sacred sample, that is a sacred sample where the sampling system must be perfect, is a feed to the plant. Because that sampling system is going to be not only a reference for the metallurgist to do good material balance, but it should also be a reference for the miner to identify what is it that he exactly sent to the plant. There is no other way. So that sampling system must be sacred, must be perfect, and that is where you have to spend the money to have a system you can trust.
Okay, next question from Roman Cruz. Does it exist a representative sampling method for the cyclones feeding?
Of course. Or the cyclone overflow? Or the feed to the cyclones?
I guess for the feed coming
the cyclone overflow.
From the mine.
Yeah. After the gravity circuit, if you need one, you can sample the cyclone overflow. Okay, you don't sample the flow going to the cyclone. You have an underflow that is recycled somewhere else, you know, and then the best sampling system is a cyclone overflow, where usually everything is going to go to that point sooner or later. It's a matter of time, okay? The underflow go back in circuit, you know, in circle, okay? Unless you have a gravity concentration circuit, but that's a different, that's good, but it's a different approach. In both cases, your best sample is the cyclone overflow. And in some cases is a cyclone overflow plus the production of the gravity concentration circuit.
Next question, Peter Peter Bersnaida from Medellin, Colombia. What would you recommend to improve the quality of channel samples in underground gold mining, gold mines, and phase developments?
This is it's important. You have to train the operator very nicely here about how to take channel samples. Sometimes you can take them on the side, on the wall. Sometimes you want to take them on the face. Be aware of one thing. The point number one here, make sure you do that in a very safe way. Safety comes first. It's not always very safe to sample a face after you blast a section underground, but you know you have to do it sometime. How to take a channel samples, it's explained in my book. You know, you can go for more details in this. It's well explained. But remember always, safety comes first, okay? And one thing is, let's say you do a channel sample with a hammer, okay? The operator draw a little canal, a little channel here, and he has to take everything with a hammer. So that may fall directly in a bucket, or it may fall on a top on the ground. Make sure he never subsamples that by hand. Everything that comes out of the wall with his hammer must go to the sample, to the laboratory. No subsampling by hand. Never.
Okay, next question. Adrian Mosler. What kind of sample can you recommend us to reduce a slurry sampler? Can you recommend to us, considering that our plant sampler in 6 hours take 18 liters?
Oh, you want to subsample the samples that come to the laboratory with a slurry sampler? Yes, there are devices on the market that exist. You know, a company like Tecpromin can build one for you. We can use a tiny little resin sampler to do that, you know, and it has to be more or less customized. You tell exactly what you do. So you will put the feed, and then you will have cutters that go in circle to take a subsample of that. Be careful not to go too small, because you have to respect the sample mass you need for the fundamental errors that I was explaining in my guideline. Be careful about that. You know, so you may not be able to go as small as you may wish. But if you have 18 liters, I will say, yes, you can go smaller than that with a good rotating, very little resin sampler will be the best. Okay. It can be customized for you.
Okay, next question, Ramona Lanis. In a plant with a SAG mill in which a gravity concentrator is installed to recover gold in the underflow of the cyclones, what will be the sampling points to reduce sampling errors?
Okay, so that go back to what I was saying earlier. This is a very good question, by the way. So if you have a gravity concentration circuit for gold, you have to trust your gravity concentration circuit. Here you are going to have Nelson concentrators. You have to make sure the entire feed go to the gravity concentration circuit. And then after that, go to the cyclone overflow. the cyclone overflow will be your first sampling station for the operation. Okay, don't try to sample the gold before the gravity circuit. You are going nowhere with that one. It's too difficult, it's too expensive, and it will never be a good system. Okay, so you have to trust your gravity concentration circuit. Make sure you have good security here. Make sure you are well aware of the total production of gold coming from the gravity circuit. Don't mix it with other gold coming from the other end of the process. Make sure you know how much gold is produced by the gravity circuit, and that is your best sample of all. And then after that, you add what you find from the cyclone overflow, and then also taking into account what you eliminated with the final tell, okay? But make sure you have a gravity circuit that is well under control. That is your best option.
Okay, next question, Jorge Campos. For metallurgical samplers, respecting the opening according to the particle size, does it exceed minimum or maximum velocity limits in the operation for the sampling obtaining?
Tellings? Repeat the question, please, if you don't mind.
Yes. For metallurgical samplers, respecting the openings according to the particle size, does it exceed minimum or maximum velocity limits in the operation for the sampling obtaining?
Okay. Be aware that there is a limit for the speed of the stream for sampling system to work properly. We find out a long time ago, there have been some study done on that, but many years ago, that if a stream flow rate is more than 2 meters per second, the sampling system starts to deteriorate, even if it's a good sampling system. So if you have evidence that the stream is 3 meters per second or 4 meters per second, sometimes even more, we got a problem, okay? You have to find a way to minimize the speed of the stream. So sometimes you have to enlarge the stream before you reach the discharge point, because at the discharge point, the stream should not navigate faster than 2 meters per second, okay? Otherwise, you will have problems.
Okay, Gustavo Roldan, what kind of a specific sampling system can you recommend for silver and gold, or of low quality, both for crushed, mineral, and slurry?
It's the same. You have to have a cross-stream sampler for cyclone overflow, for the tailings, for the concentrates. It goes by the same rule. The sampling system should not be biased, okay, by design. And then after that, you have to be careful with your sampling protocol, because if you are looking at a very low grade, you may have a severe problem with sample mass. You may have to assay much more than 30 grams or 50 grams. And that is why you may consider like the new system with Krasos, with ultraviolet bombardment. This is, but you still have to have correct sampling system no matter what.
Okay, next question, anonymous question. Does this exist a quick or experimental evaluation to determine if a plant sampling system is is the correct one? Is the correct one?
Can I ask you a favor here? Can I take a break? 2 minutes? And I need to take a break
Okay.
for 2 minutes.
Go ahead.
And then you repeat that question when I come back.
Okay, sure.
No, I did. Yeah. Oh, and another thing, Stephen says that there is no record of Norman ever being in jail in Wright County. Huh? That's what he said. I said, it's not right. I don't either. Whatever, I don't know. Okay, hang on, I have to check something.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize for that. Now I'm ready. Can you repeat the last question, please?
Yes, doctor. Anonymous question. Does it exist a quick or experimental evaluation to determine if a plant sampling system is this correct one? He's talking about heads, concentrate, and tailings.
The only hope for answering a question like that is based on visual inspections. You have to rely on a very competent expert to do this. You know, it's the only way to do it. It's for sure. Okay, because if you rely on bias test, you are going to be confused with the results. Okay, and that is no good. Rely on a very good sampling expert. Like I say, there are not many around the world today. There are maybe 5 or 6, but this is the only way to go if you really want to do it right.
Okay, next question, Ramon Alanis. There is always a difference between mine and plant or a size. The question is, what is the best way to reduce errors in the reconciliation between mine and plant size? What is the acceptable error?
If you have, yeah, it's a very common problem, you know. If you find, let's say you have a gold mine. If you find 5% less gold at the plant than what the mine announced, that's expected, and it's unlikely that you will ever do something better than that, okay? But you have interesting developments sometimes. If you have, for example, 15, 20% less gold at the plant, obviously there's something wrong, okay? So we have to investigate what's going on at the mine. And there's another issue here. Sometimes you find more gold at the plant. That's what the mine announced. Now that is, in a way, is good news, but it's also bad news because it means that we underestimate the deposit. And if we underestimate the deposit, then we have lost opportunities, obviously, somewhere. So it's good news, but it's also dangerous not to go to the bottom of it. So you have to, you know, reconciliation problems are expected, okay? For in a copper mine, if you find 2 or 3% less copper at the plant that what is announced by the mine, you are doing very well, okay? But you will always have some reconciliation problem, no matter what. Yes, it's something to keep an eye on because it can reach proportions that need serious investigation, okay?
Okay, next question, Mario Venecia. Could we determine what information could we take from an early stage test like QuizCam, MLS, mineralogic test to introduce a sampling methodology either from mining sampling or from plant sampling as well?
Can you repeat the question? I don't understand the beginning of the question.
Yes, could we determine what information could we take from an early stage test like QuizCam, MLS? I think he's talking about FCA CAM, mineralogic test to introduce a sampling methodology either from mining sampling or from plant sampling as well?
No, it's not the right way to do it. The best thing to do is to have a very careful inspection of diamond core drilling. You know, when you do the logging of those core sample, we have all the information here that we need for optimizing any kind of sampling we are going to do later on. You know, the feeds, either tailings or stuff like that. We should rely on good visual mineralogical investigation of core samples.
Okay, next question, Lydia Chavira. How can we detect segregation problems for metallurgical samplers?
Repeat, please. It's a short question.
How can we detect segregation problems for metallurgical samplers?
Segregation. How can we detect segregation problems? It's what that the word was segregation.
Yes. Yes, the problems of segregation.
Okay. You in any streams that you have in a plant, you will have segregation, okay? And that is why you cannot control segregation. It's inevitable. And that is why we have to have cross-stream samplers. Well-designed cross-stream samplers is not sensitive on across the stream segregation. It does not matter if the stream is segregated. That's the beauty of all samplers. Okay, so you're not going to control segregation. Where is going to take place and how much is going to take place is unpredictable, really. It's out of your control, okay?
Okay, next question, Johnny Corillocla, regarding health sampling defeats a concentrate plant. It is more representative, this slurry sampling of the huge size mineral sampling that is fed or available before entering to the mill? Which of both systems have a MPRE bias during the sampling process?
I'm confused with that question. I don't follow the logic of the questions. Okay, so I'm not sure. Repeat it slowly, please.
Okay, regarding health sampling, that
what kind of sampling? Bell sampling?
Is for a concentrate plant. Is
a concentrate?
Yeah, concentrate plant.
Okay.
And the question is more representative the slurry sampling or the huge size mineral sampling that is fed from a bell before entering to the mill?
It's debatable. It depends on the local condition, but I will trust more a slurry sampler. But it can be done either way. You know, we can sample the solids before you put them in slurries. But it can be done either way, but I will trust better when you do a slurry and then send that to a cross-stream sampler. I will trust that approach better.
Okay, Brian Francisco Gonzalez, how is possible to calculate accuracy and uncertainty in a sampling without having a standard reference?
To do calculation in sampling, you don't need a reference sample. You do it with the theory of sampling. You have to do some calculation for the fundamental error. You have to do some calculation with some variograms you are going to do to optimize sampling interval. So there are several issues in sampling in a plant, okay? There are problems with the fundamental error. I gave you the guideline and I will send it to you, okay? And then there are also issues about should you take a cut every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes? A variographic experiment will answer that question very well, okay? So you may have to do some variographic experiments sometime. Variographic experiment consists of taking many samples at short interval, one day, every minute you take a sample, and then you analyze every cut. So you may have 60 cuts, each cut taking at 1 minute interval with the results from the lab on those 60 samples. You may do a variogram. And from that variogram, you can see right away what is appropriate time on a normal day to cross the stream. Shall you take a cut every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes? Can you go as long as 20 minutes? It's a problem with variography, okay? That will answer that question very well.
Okay, next question, anonymous question. Is it the same a sampling system for operative control than a sampling system for metallurgical balance?
Okay, that's a good question. You know those funny-looking samplers that you have on the market that I say you cannot use those samplers for material balance, okay? Absolutely not. That is stationary cutters, multi-cutters, stationary across the stream, pressure sampler, things like that. You know, a quick grab sample for plus 4% solids, for example. All that, those samplers can be used, be careful about it, but can be used for process control. Huh? But they cannot be used ever for material balance, for metallurgical accounting. Okay, that's two different family of sampling system, and they are not compatible. You know, they have completely different objective. When you look at a sampling at a stream and you want to know if the percent solid has been changing in an unacceptable way, well, you know, you take a grab sample, you go to your Marcy balance, and then you find out very quickly if this is okay or not, okay? That's fine. Process control sampling, it can be done that way. But metallurgical accounting, where you need a very high level of accuracy, exactitude, huh? When you need a very high level of accuracy, you have to have flawless sampling stations. That's two different, completely different worlds, okay? And I have a comment here. When, say I am a general manager at the operation, I said to myself, how do I win the battle? How do I make sure that my operation is optimized? Is it with process control, or is it with metallurgical accounting? Obviously, it's process control. You control, you win the battle with process control. So you have to be on top for process control to do a lot of sampling. It does not have to be exact. It can be a little bit biased, it's no big deal, but you have to do a lot of sampling for quick process control. And that is where online analyzers are doing exceptionally well, okay? Now, what about metallurgical accounting? Metallurgical accounting, it's after the facts. The battle is already there, it is already done. So it's what is the objective of metallurgical accounting? Well, it's for the general manager to sleep well at night. Otherwise, he has no way of knowing to verify if things go well or not. It's a verification process. It's not a process to control things. It's an after-the-fact verification. Okay, so be careful here not to mix those two different philosophies. Process control is inescapable. Metallurgical accounting, it's a verification for people high level in the company to be reasonably sure that the operation is functioning properly, to do reconciliation with the mine, stuff like that. So it's completely different objectives. Huh?
Thank you, Dr. Pitard. I'll be supporting Felipe. This time I'll be reading the next question, which comes from an anonymous person. He's asking, for chemical laboratories, it is spoken about an uncertainty in the sampling process, according to ISO 17025. In sampling theory, it is mentioned that the sampling error. What is the difference between uncertainty and error for sampling?
Okay. Yeah, I have another lecture on this, but you know, it will take too long to find out where it is. I have a long development in my book on this. The difference between the difference between uncertainty and bias, if you know, it's, let me think, let me put my act together here. How to explain that in a simple way? Can I postpone the answer on this to later?
Yeah, of course, we can come back later.
I have to think about this. Put that question aside, and we are going to revisit it at the end, okay? It's an important question. But I want to explain that in a simple way, so I have to think about this.
Okay.
Let's go to the next question.
In the meantime, we can answer Oscar Solis' question. He's asking how to relate the high nugget effect with the sampling protocol and after with the interpolation of grades in the case of gold-silver deposits.
Okay, the nugget, you have to identify if you have a severe nugget effect. So the nugget effect can be, is not only gold, is not only precious metal, it can be molybdenum, copper, nickel, anything, you know, that is why you have to have a very good mineralogical study done on diamond core samples very early in a project, so you can predict if you are going to have severe nugget effect or severe in situ nugget effect, you know, which are two different things. So this is what we are talking about here is a fundamental sampling error. You know, it's a step number one in sampling to have this under control. So you cannot postpone that problem if you have evidence of minerals occurring as coarse grain, coarse chalcopyrite, coarse molybdenite, coarse gold, coarse silver minerals. You have to wake up right away and say the sampling protocols are going to be difficult and we need to optimize them right away. You cannot wait. Don't postpone that problem. Okay?
Okay, Dr. Pitard. The next question that I have comes from Vanessa Andrade. She's asking, what are your recommendations on sampling a low-grade ore stockpile which has been growing up for many years and now will be pre-processed on an ore sorter?
Yeah. Well, that's, you cannot sample the pile, that's a problem. So what's the solution here? Is to reclaim the pile, put the material on a conveyor belt, install a sampling system at the end of the conveyor belt that is loading trucks going to the plant, and that will tell you exactly what goes to the plant, okay? But you cannot sample the stockpile.
Thank you, Dr. Pitard. The next question comes from someone anonymous, and the question is, in order to have a correct conciliation between mine and plant, does the sampling department must be managed by an external company, or can the plant manage this department?
No, it should be managed by yourself, by the company. You know, it's an internal affair. So you have to have, within the company, you have to have your champions for sampling. They should be well trained. They can go to sampling courses. They can, you know, read books. And so in an operation, you should have a little task force. You should have a little group of people that are your champion on sampling issue. You should have a geologist, a metallurgist, a miner, maybe a statistician, maybe a chemist, a laboratory manager. You have those 5 people that know exactly all the subtleties about sampling. And when you have an issue somewhere, a reconciliation problem, or buy a new system, or want to install a new system somewhere because you have an expansion, put those 5 people together, and they will determine what is the best thing to do. You need that internal task force, I call it. It's an internal task force that is a necessity in every operation.
Excellent, Dr. Pitard, thank you. The next one comes from Danilo Javier. His question is, do you think that bulk ore sorting is an useful technique for sampling?
Not necessarily. It's 2 different things, you know. No. For sampling, what you have to do is to know the mineralogy of what you are looking for. And again, I go back to the inescapable stage of looking at a diamond core sample early in the project to find out what kind of animal you are dealing with, what is the distribution of those critical minerals that are very valuable for you, how do they occur. And this is ore sorting. We will not answer that kind of questions.
Thank you. The next one is also an anonymous question. It goes like this. Is there any recommendation for implementing a sampling plan in an alluvial gold ore? Yeah, that is a good one. So in alluvial gold ore, so since the gold is distributed in a very erratic way, there is no structural distribution of gold that makes really sense. It's gold has been concentrating in unpredictable area, in pockets that you don't know where they are, when the alluvials were taking place and things like that. So in that case, you cannot take a sample and send that to the sample preparation and tell them to crush this stuff and split it and send it for fire assay. That you go nowhere with this. It's not going to work. So what you have to do here is to take a large sample. You know, you can have a mini pilot plant in the field for that alluvial deposit. You can have a baby Nelson concentrator, for example, a small one, okay? So you're going to take 100 kilo, send it to the Nelson concentrator, get the concentrate to the lab and find out how much gold you have. And you're going to repeat that all the time. You have to have in the field a tiny gold concentrator, baby Nelson concentrator, that will be very valuable for you to verify what's going on, you know, at all time as you try to process many tons through a plant with alluvial gold. Excellent, Dr. Pitard. The next question comes from Gino Romero. His question is, what kind of sampler do you recommend for a cyanide flow?
For cyanide, so for example, in a CIL circuit, it's the same. It's, you know, you are going to have a primary sampler with a secondary Vezin, maybe a tertiary Vezin. It's the same, but we have to to make sure that we keep it clean, that we keep people safe with cyanide when they go to either clean or collect samples. You know, there are safety issues here with cyanide, of course. Usually, people that work in a CI/PCI circuit, they are well aware of those safety issues, and you cannot have access to the sampling station sometime until they fix a few things to make sure that it is a safe thing to do, okay? A safe environment. So safety comes first here.
Excellent. The next question comes from Manuel Cherres. He's asking, what could you recommend to reduce a difference between 10 to 20% of a gold head, calculated with plant sampling with the grade determined by geology in the ore that feed the milling plant and leaching tanks?
So here it's a very complex problem, okay? Obviously, because what you predict with drilling before you mine that stuff is one thing. What you're going to see as you mine it may be completely different. So as you go, you have to adapt. And at the end, that stuff will go to the plant, and then you will know the ultimate truth. So it's an iteration process. With geology, you can find out what you have, but you can go only so far because it's very expensive to drill. After that, when you mine, you know, you may have a better definition of what you have because you have a sample at very close intervals, either in open pit or underground. You can take sampling at very close interval and then have a much better picture of what the deposit is. Sometimes you have to challenge your geological model because you realize that your previous geological model was not necessarily correct. So it's an iteration process. And then at the mine, after that, we have to do the best to send the good stuff to the plant and get rid of the waste. That's another challenge, you know, and frankly, ultimately, we will never know the truth until we process the material at the plant. So at the plant, it should be the ultimate stage where we know exactly what we were dealing with. So it's, like I say, it's an iteration process. It's never perfect, you know, but as we go, we should be able to get better and better.
Thank you, Dr. Pitard. The next one comes from Gerardo Miranda. Gerardo asks, what kind of sampling is the ideal for a stockpile?
For a stockpile, the ideal sampling is to reclaim the stockpile, send it to a conveyor belt, sample it at the end of the conveyor belt, and then create a new stockpile that you will send whenever you want at the plant. But you cannot drill a stockpile. It will not work.
Thank you. The next one comes from Loreto Romo. Loreto is asking, do you recommend cross-path samplers for a tertiary or rotary sampler?
That it's a problem of personal preference. It can be done right both ways. For my personal preference is for large flow or large tonnage, I prefer straight path, non-rotating, but straight path sampler. That's my preference. And then after that, when you do secondary sampling, which much smaller flow or tertiary sampling, I rather have those nice little rotating Wesen samplers. I like that kind of technology. But you could have a secondary straight path sampler as well. It can be done properly.
Good, thank you. The next question comes from Angel Vera. Angel asks, what is the best sampling method for blasting?
For blast hole?
Blasting, that's correct.
Yeah. It depends on if it's a copper mine where the bench are a 15-meter mining bench with a diameter about 30 centimeter diameter. So you will have on the ground a pile that is about 2 or 3 tons of material. So in that case, you have to do a manual channel. You do a radial channel on two opposite sides, and then all the way to the ground. And then when you have your channel open, you with a shovel, you take a radial cut on each side. So you will have 4 cuts, 2 for this channel and 2 for the opposite channel. You will have 4 cuts, a total of about 20 kilo that you will take to the laboratory. That is for very large bench copper mine, okay, for example. If it's a gold mine where the bench is maybe 7 meters, the drilling is not so big. So on the ground, you don't have a whole bench of material. You may have only 600-700 kilo, I don't know. So in that case, you may put a radial bucket before you start drilling. And then when the operator enters the subdrill, passador, when the driller enters the subdrill, you remove the bucket. And that will be a fairly good sample, okay?
Thank you, Dr. Pitard. The last question that we have for today, it comes from Jorge Ruiz. And Jorge wants to know, for the sampling of a silver truck and stacking, which is the best way to sample it? Does it exist a certified method?
To sample trucks?
Correct, a silver truck and stacking.
Is the truck going to the plant or the truck going to the shipment of a concentrate?
Maybe we can answer the both stages of the processing because he doesn't specify.
Okay, if it's a truck going to the plant with a coarse material, you cannot sample the truck. It won't work. If it's a truck full of concentrate going to the port or going from one client to the smelter, that kind of thing, you know, that is very common sampling. It can be done with tubes, with augers, you know, but he has to represent, every time you take an increment, he has to represent the full thickness of the truck. You cannot take only part. If you drill halfway down the truck, it won't work. He has to, each time you take an increment, he has to go all the way to the bottom of the truck to take a full column, that is one increment, and then do that again several times within the trucks until you have maybe 5 of them, you composite them, and that is a good sample, okay? But if it's coarse material like a runoff mine, cannot be done.
Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Pitard. We are over now. I would like to hand over for Felipe to give us all the final comments.
Yes, I would like to say thank you very much to everybody. And I would like to say thank you to Dr. Francis Pitard and to Zacatecas Mining Cluster. And I would like to say to our Mexican customers that we one reference. We have one reference for a sampling system here in Mexico that is working very well. And they can contact us, and then maybe we can arrange a meeting or a visit with our customer. And we will finish another installation in 4 or 5 weeks for 5 sampling system. And was a pleasure for this webinar with the Mexico business. I would like to say thank you very much too. Before we leave, so I would like to ask to Dr. Francis Pitard, what is your message to our customer for all America with the question that you received during 2 days? So what is your final message to our customers?
Okay, it's very good. What you're doing is very good. You know what, the best thing you can do, I'm talking within Mexico, but you know, it would be great if we could do it in the US or in Canada or in many other parts in the world, you know, and has been done in Chile, for example, or in Peru as well. Some of your operation within Mexico should become benchmark, the best you can get. So when you have those benchmark operation where you have been making a serious effort to install good system, like you just mentioned, you may have 1 or 2 operations where this is taking place right now. So they become the benchmark, in other words, the model for everybody else. And that is very good because you can have visitors that you know, they can look at that stuff and it gives them a good incentive to say, oh, you know, we didn't think about this, we didn't think about that. Now we understand why we have problems. So it's critically important for an organization like you have to create those benchmark models, okay? It's a wonderful thing to do.
Very much. Thank you very much for everybody, and have a good day.
Okay, so